All right. So I guess I can start out. You can see me to make it a little more personal. Kind of start diving into material here. A couple things I want to mention off the top. So sorry for abruptly ending class yesterday. My intent is to leave it open as I'm packing up for a few minutes. People ask questions. I accidentally hit exiting out of Zoom as opposed to just stopping the recording. So I will try to be a little bit more careful today about that and moving forward. I'll also get an announcement up after class. I had someone ask a question, which I'm glad they did. You should always ask questions if you think that there's something that's kind of weird. In that module two practice problems, so the answer key was correct. In the solutions, I was working through them quickly and I changed some of the questions around. And I think down here it had 120 over 40 was negative 1/3. It's clearly just kind of that slope is -3 there, or the slope, kind of that cost is 3. So I just kind of updated it so you can see that cost for the x-axis good was 3 there. Looks like it did something a little weird to my image. So I'll maybe play around with that and re-upload this, replace it so that it kind of has the, so this looks a little bit cleaner. I tried to get this done right before class. But everything else should be good. It was just that kind of one problem. Okay. All right. Any other questions for before we dive into module 3? All right, so we've got that module 2 quiz, module 1 quiz. If you haven't done them already, do by the end of the week. Also, I realize the participation grades aren't showing up because the due date hasn't passed in the grade book. So as soon as that due date passes, those will kind of pop up and show you what your score is on those quizzes. I might even try to post them later today. I think there's a setting I can get it, so just post it if you have done it and not if you haven't. I also, they were supposed to auto sync. Module 3 wasn't, so I've got things I think set up correctly after talking to a tech person now that these should be auto syncing. If not, I can always sync them as soon as that due date passes. So I'll keep an eye on that to make sure those grades are kind of transferred over from Top Hat right away. Okay. So we're going to start with module 3. I'll kind of have, if I were you, would have those skeleton slides pulled up. I'll post the complete versions after we're kind of done covering the material tomorrow. And then we'll have our participation quiz here today that we'll eventually work through. And then those practice problems and the solutions there are available. And then I will put up all the module 4 materials as well. We won't start that until next week, but you'll see those kind of get thrown up on Canvas if you want to kind of just take a glimpse at them if you have extra time before, don't feel like you need to. So any questions before we dive into material here? Okay. All right. So module 3 is really going to be all about supply and demand. All right. So we're going to use some of the things we've already talked about. I've hopefully set us up so that it's a little bit, we have some reference point to make the beginning be able to work through it a little bit quicker to save some time for the more difficult stuff. So we are going to be talking about different types of markets, right? So there's going to be a market for anything. I'll generally use like some goods you would think about typically buying, I don't know, hamburgers, chairs, I might even do like college degrees though. We can look at the market for that. So all a market is whenever we have a product where there's a group of buyers of that good and sellers. Okay. Now, a competitive market is going to be one where no buyer or seller has any influence over the price. So you might have heard of, play the game Monopoly. We're not thinking about that, right? There's not just one seller, there's many, many sellers. And so if you try to charge a price that other sellers aren't, everyone's just going to not buy from you and go buy from the other people if you try to charge a higher price. There's also many, many buyers. So if I'm thinking about making a contract, there's not just one person I can sell my product to. If they don't want to pay a certain price, but other people do, there's many buyers I can go try to sell my product to. So nobody has any influence over the price. And we'll eventually talk about how market can, how do I want to say this? The principles behind these markets will lead to specific, what we'll end up calling equilibrium prices, right? Another thing that we'll assume, and we'll complicate this towards the end of the semester, but for now, we're assuming that we're looking at a product, whatever market we're looking at, it's the exact same product. So this isn't like comparing, it wouldn't be like the market for Honda automobiles, because those are very different than Chevy, right? We're going to be looking at, say, the market, not for all automobiles, because we know they vary. We're looking at just the one one product. Now, obviously, with automobiles, we might have some monopoly power, so that doesn't quite work out to be our perfectly competitive market. So something I always use that might be a better example of this is a perfectly competitive market where all goods are the same is bottled water. I mean, I guess, my mom or something will say Dasani tastes better than Aquafina or whatever, but really think about cheap bottled water that you'd buy a 24 pack of, great value brand, whatever the, kind of cheap bottled water, it's all the same, right? And so we have the exact same good, no buyer or seller has any influence over the price. That's going to be our perfectly competitive market, okay? So we're assuming that in this chapter, right? So in these markets, we're going to have buyers and sellers. So we'll first start talking about the buyers, right? Or what we'll call demand, okay? So the quantity demanded, so this is where we'll make a slight differentiation between the words quantity demanded and overall demand. So the quantity demanded is just how much is someone willing to buy at one specific price. So if the price is for a bottle of water is $1, maybe my quantity demanded, I'd be willing to buy 5. The price is $2, my quantity demanded, I might only be willing to buy 3, right? So this law of demand, I think, really follows intuition. If the price of something is higher, quantity demanded, like in my example, would fall, right? If the prices of something goes up, or want to buy more or less of it, you're more likely to buy less of it, right? It's more expensive, right? You have limited resources of income, and so I'd be less likely to buy, I'd be like I wouldn't be as likely to buy as the same amount of the good as I was before. So this law of demand kind of says that the price and quantity demanded have this inverse relationship. That as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Okay. You can use arrows. I'll start using arrows a lot in this class instead of like writing out the words increase, decrease. We'll just kind of be using arrows to kind of show the directional changes. Okay. So for now, and I say for now, really throughout the whole semester, we're going to assume that demand is linear. If you were to kind of take another econ course after this, microeconomics, kind of the next level, we'd start to think about, well, what happens when demand isn't linear? But for us, we'll kind of keep it linear. So what's going to be driving this law of demand? Right? Well, one component of it is what we call the substitution effect. When the price of a good is higher, well, it's not the only thing I can buy, right? If I walk into a store, I had someone in office hours, I use this example. Like, let's say I walk in, I can buy hot dogs or hamburgers, right? And all of a sudden the price of hamburgers goes up. I am less likely to buy hamburgers, more likely to buy hot dogs. So when the price of that hamburger went up, I bought less of it because there were other goods I could buy that are now relatively cheaper. That's the substitution effect. That's going to be part of what is driving this inverse relationship. Now, the income effect is, let's say I'm dead set on only buying hamburgers when I walk into this store. Well, if the price of hamburgers is higher, let's say before it was $5, and I had $15 in my pocket, I could buy 3 hamburgers. If I then walked into the store and now hamburgers cost $7.50, I've still got the same $15. I've still have the same income. If I only want to buy hamburgers, now I can only afford to buy 2. So the fact that we have a limited resource of income, when prices go up, the income effect will also cause that quantity demand to go down. So both of these effects will kind of drive this law of demand or drive this inverse relationship. Let me get this up here so it's not in our way. Okay. That shouldn't be anything too crazy yet. So we'll have some visuals to go along with this, but starting out, we'll think about these different prices, right? A good can be, I can charge different prices for a good. So when I walk into a store, it could be $1, $2, $3. What would my quantity demanded be at every single price? That's going to be our demand schedule. So our demand schedule is just going to be a table that has the different prices that we could see charged for this good and the resulting quantity demanded for the individual. Okay. So here I've got kind of a goofy example, but we'll use Zoolander. Once again, God, I expect all of you have seen this ridiculously dumb movie, but orange mocha frappuccinos, this doesn't make any sense to you. Just think about a drink from Starbucks, right? So we've got this product, right? And we're going to look at one individual's demand for this product. So if they were completely free, there's still going to be a limit on how many I demand, right? I don't want to just sit there and I can't drink 20 of these frappuccinos, or at least I shouldn't. I'll get sick. And so even at a price of 0, there may be, it's not like it's going to be an infinite quantity demanded. And then as the price goes up, Well, the income and substitution effect would both drive the amount that I am willing to buy, or the quantity demanded, down. So as the price is going up, our quantity demanded is going down. So this is our demand schedule. If I told you the price was $3, you know the quantity demanded is 6. $5, quantity demanded is 2, so on and so forth. Okay. Well, if we have a table, we have 2 columns, we could really put this in graph form, right? I can make quantity my x-axis, and I'm going to put price on my y-axis, okay? So I'm going to map out all of these different points, right, onto a graph. So I've got price up here on my y-axis, quantity on my x-axis. I just start plotting these points. So at a price of 0, the quantity demanded was 12. At a price of $1, quantity demanded is 10. I just go through and plot each one of these points. And then just to be complete, although in practice maybe I can't buy half of an orange mocha frappuccino, when we start to look at things on a larger scale, right, we're going to want to think about there's really, I can make all kinds of, all kinds of choices. So even if it's, I can buy 12 ounces versus 16 ounces, right? If you want to think about this as like not the number of drinks, but the number of ounces that I want, I could, order a bunch of different possibilities here. Okay. So here's my demand schedule. I turn that into my demand curve. So these values were the quantity demanded at different prices. That was quantity demanded. Demand for this product is the entire curve. So demand is that relationship between price and quantity demanded. So my curve here, it's not a curve, it's a line, but the demand curve, right, will represent all of the price and quantity demanded combinations, or that relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay. So we'll notice it's downward sloping. So the slope is always going to be negative, right? I say the slope is negative, any line that we have, we really could come up with an equation behind it, right? So you don't have to look at me anymore, right? Anytime I've got a curve or a line on a graph, right? In general, we have y is equal to mx plus b, right? Well, what is our y? We said we were going to put price on the y-axis. We're just going to write this out in less mathematical form. We're going to start with the very first letter of the alphabet. We'll say we have our intercept, and then we've got our slope. What was our slope? Or sorry, what was on our what would our slope be multiplied by? What was on our x-axis? Well, that was the quantity demanded. So we'll say it's the quantity demanded, and then for whatever good x we're looking at. So this is going to be our demand equation. So we start out, we have this demand schedule. Where were these numbers coming from, right? So in our example, if we went back, I think I had, what this point was, well, let me remind myself so I can match this up to the slides. So we had what, 6, okay. So price 6, quantity demanded for these orange mocha frappuccinos was 12. And we had that demand curve in between, okay? So one of the points on that curve was at $2. We had the quantity demanded was 8, right? But where did that come from? Okay. Well, if I were to write out this equation, what is my y-intercept here? So remember, general form of the equation, this would be your y-intercept, right? When the quantity demanded is 0, what is the corresponding price? Well, here we've got 6, right, with that corresponding price. And then as I see the quantity demanded go up by 1 unit, right? So if this goes from 0 to 1, what would so this is like my price at 0, a quantity demanded of 0. What would my price be at a quantity demanded of 1? Well, the intercept of 6, right, plus whatever the slope is times Well, if this is going up by 1, going from 0 to 1, we multiply by 1. So what is the slope of this curve? Once again, change in y over change in x is how we find slope. So this is just going to be a change in the price over change in quantity of that good. Okay. Oh, no need to apologize. Sorry, I didn't mean to pull that up. Oh, never mind. You guys should just be able to see this. So what was I saying before I saw that chat? Oh, so here I've got the change in price, kind of like our production possibilities curve. I can just use these two extreme points. What was going from 6 to 0? So -6. Quantity went from 0 to 12. So here I've got a slope of -1/2. So now I know what that slope is. So my demand equation would be six minus 1/2 times the quantity of whatever good I'm looking at. So where did this point come from? Well, if I've got my demand equation now, if I were to say, okay, what would the price have to be in order for someone to buy 8 units of this good? Well, if I plug in 8 there, I get, okay, 6 minus 1/2 times 8, that price would be $2. Now, I could also think about if the price were $2, what would that corresponding quantity demanded be? Now, that's just a little bit, a little bit more algebra, but nothing crazy, right? I move the 2 to either sides, I add 1/2 times quantity demanded to both sides, and I'd end up with what? 1/2 quantity is equal to what? 4. Multiply both sides by 2, and I get that that corresponding quantity, if the price were $2, would be 8 units. So I can work in either direction. I could give you as long as you have that demand equation, I can give you the quantity, you can figure out the price. I can give you the price, and you can figure out the quantity. So why did you take out the 8 from the equation? So because this is, here, let me write this out again, make it clear. So here's our demand equation. Okay. So if I gave you the price of $2, right, then you would plug in 2 and then solve for what that corresponding quantity was. If instead, so this is like first scenario, if instead I told you the quantity demanded, then you would plug in the quantity demanded of 8 here, and then you could solve for what that corresponding price would be. Right? So usually you'll be given only one of those, right? Typically, we plug in the quantity to figure out the corresponding price, but I just wanted to kind of show you, if I gave you a price, you could also find what that corresponding quantity demanded would be. Okay? No worries. All right. Any other questions there before we keep moving? Okay. So we've now kind of got this demand curve. We talked about our demand equation. Here's kind of the general form. Now, A, our intercept will always be positive, and then B, because it's a downward sloping curve, when we calculate that change in Y over the change in X, or the change in price over the change in the quantity demanded, it's always going to be negative, right? So here in our example, we said, where does, what price would quantity demanded be equal to 0? Well, we would plug a 0 into the quantity demanded, into our demand equation. We'd find, oh, it's just the intercept, that price of $6. And then, what's the slope there? I was going to have that demand curve. I could calculate the slope. And what that slope is telling me is that how much does the price have to fall to encourage a consumer to buy one more unit of this good? Right? So it's the price change that we would need to see in order for this person to buy one more unit of that good. Okay. So in our example, we had a slope of -0.5. So for every 50-cent decrease in the price, our consumer was willing to buy one more of these orange mocha frappuccinos. Okay. So that was our demand equation. I kind of already went through that. Well, now I want to think about, okay, I've got this demand equation. It's also telling me something else that we've already talked about, which is the marginal benefit for different quantity demanded values. So when we think about how much is someone buying at a specific price, well, I would pay up to whatever my marginal benefit is, right? So if the price for the consumer is essentially their marginal cost, right? So as long as their marginal benefit is above the price, above the marginal cost, then that consumer will be willing to buy that unit of the good. So we can kind of interpret our demand curve as representing the price represents the marginal benefit of each quantity. Okay, so think about it this way. If I've got my quantity demanded, so I've got my price, excuse me. When the price was $6, we said quantity demanded was, we can kind of think about, here's my demand curve. At $6, they didn't buy any. So what must be true? Well, remember, I only do something if the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to my marginal cost. For the consumer, when they're buying a product, what is the marginal cost? Well, it's whatever that price of the good is. So it must be the case that if I'm not buying anything when the price is $6, it must be that my marginal benefit is actually less than that marginal cost of 6, that price of 6. Now, when will I buy that very first unit? Right? I think if we kind of go back and plug the numbers in, so we had what? Price is equal to 6 minus 1/2 times Q. Well, when the quantity is 1, right? When will I buy that first unit? It's when that price will be $5.50. Any price above that, I'm not going to buy that first unit yet. So what must be true? At all of these prices, the price must be above my marginal benefit. It isn't equal to my marginal benefit until I get to this $5.50, whereas where I'm first willing to buy that first unit. Now, at that price of $5.50, though, was I going to buy that second unit? No. If this were my price, the marginal benefit, which is what our demand curve will end up representing, is below the marginal cost. So how can I convince the consumer to buy the second unit? I'm going to have to lower the price by another 50 cents. At that price of 5, now they will buy that second unit. It must be that right at $5, that's where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost or equal to the price. Now, as I lower that price, now the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost or price for that second unit. Well, at this lower price, the marginal benefit of the first, I know I was willing to buy it at $5.50, so I'm definitely still going to buy that first unit when the price is 5. So our demand curve here, these corresponding prices, we can actually think about when I've got a demand, any demand curve, what this is really telling me is the price is telling me the marginal benefit of each one of those units. So when I'm finding these prices, I'm also finding what the marginal benefit of that quantity demanded would be. So in our example, go back here. There we go. What's the marginal benefit of the fourth unit? Well, they buy that fourth unit when the price is at $4. So it must be that for the fourth unit, their marginal benefit is 4, right? That's when they're willing to buy that fourth unit, right? And then what's the marginal benefit of the 10th unit? Well, they won't buy that 10th unit until the price is 1. So it must be that their marginal benefit of that 10th unit is only $1. Right? So these prices, right, represent the marginal benefit of each one of these number of quantity demanded units. Okay. Oh. So we'll kind of work through the first two. You could add the third, the fourth, etc. Now, what do we notice? Well, if the demand curve is downward sloping, that in order to buy more, the price has to fall. And we just said that price is also going to represent the consumer's marginal benefit for each one of those quantities. Well, if price is falling, that means marginal benefit is falling. We've already talked about this, right? This is kind of an intuitive thing where the very first unit I buy of something is going to provide me the highest marginal benefit, right? If it's a hot day out like today, I want to go get this Frappuccino, cool down. The very first one provides me a huge relief, huge marginal benefit. I'd be willing to pay a lot of money for it. Now, once I've bought the first one, I've cooled down, I've kind of quenched my thirst. Yeah, maybe I'm still wanting a second one, but I'm not willing to pay near as much as I was willing to pay for the first because it doesn't give me as high of a marginal benefit. So this diminishing marginal benefit that we talked about in module 2 is going to kind of be living behind the scenes here in the demand curve. Okay. Now, even if you want to kind of try to straw man this and say, well, every time I drink one of these, I get the same marginal benefit. So let's just assume for a second that there was no, it provides the same benefit to your life every time you consume one. Well, every time you buy one of these drinks, what are you not doing? You're not buying something else. So you haven't, what are you giving up, right? You're starting to lose benefits from other things. So even if you thought you had the same marginal benefit for each quantity, you don't, right? Because as you buy more and more, you're giving up buying other things that you cared more about that brought larger marginal benefits to you. And so your marginal benefit of choosing to buy one more of these drinks would still be declining. Now, usually both of these things are occurring at kind of the same time, this idea of like substitution, and then just the fact that having more of something, generally the marginal benefit is lower. All right. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? Okay. So we can now think about an individual demand curve, like this was just Zoolander, his price, his quantity demanded at different prices. We know that in a market, we said we have many buyers, many sellers. So now we're going to go, okay, what if there's two buyers in this market? All right, so Zoolander and Ken. Well, each of them is going to have their own demand schedule, right? They might be willing to consume different amounts at different prices. So we'll kind of notice here, these numbers aren't the same. How would I get total market demand? Well, if the price was $3, I know Zoolander will be willing to buy 6, Ken will buy 8. So what is the total market demand? Just the sum of those two things, 14. So all you do to find market demand is add up every individual in that market's demand, right? Or at every single price, add up the quantity demanded for every individual in that market. Once you do that, you now have these prices. You've got the market's quantity demanded. You could graph that out, and now you've got market demand. Now, it'll on a graph look very, it looks the same. It's just going to be a line on the graph, but it's the sum of all these individuals' demand curves. Okay. So let me give you another way to think about market and individual demand. So let's say I've got my quantity demanded for this product, and I've got the corresponding price. And I think it was what? Start out at, and draw these two individuals. This is what, 6. All right. So this is going to be, this was Zoolander's demand curve. And then if I remember right, let's see, let's go back to Ken. Ken has, it'd be like 12. And I'll put this in a different color. So here was Ken's demand curve. All right. Oh. Okay. So here I put two individual demand curves on the same graph. Okay. What would market demand be? Well, if I think about market demand, all I'm going to do is at every single one of these prices, just add up how much each person is buying. Right? So here I would kind of add these two together so that my market demand, right, if the price were $6, well, I'm only going to have Ken buying it. But down here, what do I start to get? Well, now I have to add these two together. I start to get that market demand is going to be the sum of those two things, right? And in fact, I know that market demand, if I'm down here at a price of 0, each person's buying 12, my market demand would be 24. Right? So I try to use the example that we had. a more general form that might be a little bit easier to kind of look at is anytime I've got multiple individuals' demand curves, right? So this might be like person one's demand curve, person two, person three. Market demand is just going to be adding all of those up. So market demand always has to be larger than the individual's demand curve, right? Because I've got multiple individuals, I'm adding them all together. But once we do that, right, it's really going to look no different, right? So once I add those up, I now have a demand schedule. I've got prices, different combinations of the coin demanded. Now I can think about this as, it looks the same. I mean, the numbers are different, but this now is representing in all of market demand. Okay. So a little bit of a tricky question. I don't think I have it here in the slide. Before we start to think about demand shifting. So I said the individual demand curve represented each individual's marginal benefit. Okay. When I'm adding these up, the market demand curve doesn't tell me the marginal benefit of any one person, but it is giving me, and this is maybe not exactly technically the perfect way to describe it, but this is, I think, the best way to intuitively think about it. Market demand is essentially telling me the average marginal benefit of every individual in my market. Okay. So your individual demand curve, you can directly get the marginal benefit of each quantity demanded for each person. Your market demand, this price no longer represents the marginal benefit of one person. It's kind of like for that 18th unit, what is the average marginal benefit to all consumers in that market? Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving? Make sure there's nothing in the chat. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, we've got this demand curve. We're going to want to think about it can move, right? It can shift, right? So when we're looking at that relationship between price and quantity demanded, we did this thing that we talked about last class, which is we're holding everything else equal, right? Or ceteris paribus, okay? And I said last class, it might have been the 2 classes ago, but this idea of holding everything else constant so we can analyze just this cause-effect relationship between these two things, price and quantity demanded. So all these other things that we're holding constant might impact demand. So for example, we know that people are going to be willing to buy more or less when the price changes, but even if the price were the same, if I have more income, am I going to be more or less likely to buy that good than I was before? More likely, right? So even at the same price, we might see the quantity demanded increases because income changed. So that's just one of these other things. We're going to have a bunch of different examples that we'll talk through. So a change in any one of these other things will shift the entire demand curve. So I'll first kind of just show you what a shift in the demand curve looks like, and then we'll think about the things that are shifting it. So if I've got my old demand curve here, right, and at this price, this was the quantity demanded that I was buying before, right, or that I wanted to buy before. If I have something, and like in my example, I have more income, well, at every single price, I can now afford to buy more. So another way we think about the demand curve, it's not just my willingness to pay, right? So this was the idea that when the price was below or equal to my marginal benefit, I was willing to pay that much to buy the good. It's also my ability. So if I don't have any income, even though I'd be willing to pay a certain amount, I can't, right? So as I have more income, my ability and willingness to pay goes up. So at every single price, the quantity demanded would be higher, right? Oh, I'm pointing to the wrong graph. I just said higher, right? So our demand increase when we have more income would shift this demand to the right. So maybe before at this old price, with my old income at this price, I was buying this much. Now at that same price, but I have more income, I can buy more. And then the exact opposite, let's say I have less money. Well, before maybe at this price, I was buying this much. Now I don't have as much income. My ability and willingness to pay went down. I'm only buying this much. So leftward shifts are going to be decreases in demand, right? Because that represents that at the same price, I now am buying less than I was before, right? And then rightward shifts will represent increases in demand. Whatever, even if I look at the same price, I am now willing to buy or willing and able to buy more than I was before. Okay. So right shifts increases, left shifts decreases. Okay. So we can now start to think about some of the things that are going to impact, right, or increase or decrease demand. So I think this one, based off of a drawing we already had, should be relatively easy, but I'll kind of go through it and do it again. So let's think about if I have quantity demanded and price. If I have two individuals, right? If I wanted to, so this is like the demand from individual one, demand from individual two. When I add those demand curves up, here's kind of like my market demand. Now, if I have more buyers in a market, I have more individuals who want to buy this good. Maybe I don't have just two people, I now have a third, and I now have a fourth. Well, now to get market demand, I'm going to add up all four of these. So market demand when I have more buyers is going to be higher or increase a shift to the right. Okay. Now, generally, we see markets kind of growing. But if I have something like, I don't know, I would argue even the way that, there's so much content out there. Network TV, right? They probably don't have as many people demanding their product anymore, right? There's so, you can watch Netflix, Hulu, all these other things have their own TV shows. And so they might actually in that market have fewer consumers than they did before. So if you have fewer consumers, instead of seeing this rightward shift, you'd have fewer individual demand curves to add up. So you'd end up with a market demand that is less or a leftward shift. Okay. So when it comes to the number of buyers, right, we can kind of just think about this. As I add more people to this market, I'm going to see it shift to the right. If I, for some reason, had fewer people, shift to the left. So here I've got my third person I added in here, Hansel, right? So market demand was whatever it was before. Now at every point, I have not only Ken and Zoolander's demand, but I also have to add in Hansel's. And so there I've got this increase or rightward shift in demand. Okay. So that one I think it shouldn't be too bad. I've also kind of already alluded to this one, but I kind of left something out. So let's say I have more income, right? When I was talking about it earlier, I said generally more income leads to an increase in demand, right? So if people have more money, their ability and willingness to pay has went up, okay? So we're going to have like a rightward shift. This is most goods. So we'll call these normal goods. When income going up also leads to demand increasing. So there's this positive relationship between the two. That would be a normal good. And I'll break this down with some arrows here in a second. So this is most products, clothing, computers, new cars, etc. We also have inferior goods in our economy, which are, I always kind of think about these as things that you're only buying out of necessity. Right? So for example, my demand back when I was in college for for laundromats was high, right? Because I didn't have I didn't have a washer and dryer. I didn't have enough money, right? When my income went up, what once I was able to buy my own home and have a washing machine, what happened to my demand for laundromats? It went down. So there, my income going up actually led to a decrease in demand for that product. So that would be an example of what we call an inferior good. That increases in income are actually causing the demand for that product at every price, the quantity demand at every price, to actually go down. So I used the laundromat. Usually, like another example you'll see in like textbooks and stuff are like ramen noodles. Although that one, I don't know, kind of I can poke holes in that example because I still eat ramen noodles even though I have more money than I did in college. But what it's trying to get at is less desirable foods you're only buying out of necessity. A personal example of mine might be, oh, I don't know. I don't, well, I will if my wife's not with me. But I used to buy like only discounted meat at the grocery store. Now that I have enough money to, yeah, I don't worry about as much. I don't buy it as often, right? So that might be an inferior good. Public transportation is another perfect example. As people have more income, they typically rely less and less on public transportation. That's an example of an inferior good. The other examples we can always use, in college, maybe you're just buying whatever the cheapest beer is. I haven't bought a pack of Natty Ice since I was 21, I think. So I have more money. I'm not buying the less inferior products. You can think about it that way. So I will give you a way, kind of shorthand way, to think about these changes in income. Okay? So if I have an increase in income for a normal good, that's going to have a positive relationship with the quantity demanded at every single price, or we can kind of just think about this as our demand curve, right? So when income goes up, my demand curve for a normal good would also go up. If it's an inferior good, right, it's the exact opposite. When I see increases in income, there my demand actually goes down. And you can, right, this can work in the other way. If I have less income, then for a normal good, I'm going to buy less of it. And for an inferior good, if I have less income, I'm actually going to buy more of it. So we can do, the initial change can be an increase or a decrease in income. And then what we're kind of looking at is what would the impact be on my demand curve, right, from either that increase or decrease in income. And that will vary whether or not it's a normal or inferior good. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? All right, let me see here before we go back to the slides. I want to look at what questions I have for today because I'm not sure. Just I want to see where we're at on time. Okay, perfect. So there we go. So some of the other things that can shift demand are going to be the not only income, the number of buyers, but also the price of related goods. Okay, so I can think about I've got two types of relationships between goods. The first would be that two goods are substitutes of each other. Right? So if two goods are substitutes, and I'm thinking about I can buy either one of them, I don't think it's too crazy to think about if I walk into a store, I can buy either Pepsi or Coke. Those are substitute goods for me. If the price of Pepsi is twice as high, it all of a sudden goes up and is twice as much as Coke, am I more or less likely to buy Pepsi? Less likely, right? I'm more likely to substitute away from it and buy the other product. So when the price of one good goes up and it causes the demand for the other good to go up, that means I'm substituting towards that now relatively cheaper good. Those would be substitute goods, right? So Pepsi, Coke, back in the day when laptop computers were more expensive than desktops, we kind of had that relationship. Pen or pencils, if all of a sudden pens are crazy expensive, people are going to start relying more on pencils. We have kind of this inverse relationship. Um, and then the other type of goods we have, and I'll break this down here in a second, give you some other examples as well, are complementary goods, right? So these are going to be goods that are used together, okay? So, some examples of this might be, I always say, I think a kind of, I don't know, peanut butter jelly, bagels, and cream cheese, but people don't always consume those things together. So I always think a really good example is gasoline and gas-powered vehicles, right? So if all of a sudden the price of gas skyrockets and people have the choice now between buying a gas-powered vehicle or an electric vehicle, what's going to happen to the demand for electric vehicles? Or sorry, what's going to happen? Not electric vehicles. If the price for gas skyrockets, what's going to happen to the demand for gas-powered vehicles? Well, if I have a gas-powered vehicle, I can only use it if I have gas. So when the price of gas goes up, it's almost like the price of using my gas-powered vehicle also goes up. So if the price of gas goes up, do people want to, are they be more or less likely to buy these gas-powered vehicles? Less likely, right? So there, for a complementary good, when the price of gas is going up, I'm less likely to buy that complementary good. So there, I've got kind of these working in kind of opposite directions. Okay. So I'll shorthand this before we look at expectations here and give some other examples that I think might help. So if I have substitute goods here, and I want to make sure. Okay, so substitute goods. Oh, what's a good example? So if I've got like, well, you could even think about different universities. If they're substitutes, their degrees are substitutes. So let's say we'll pick on, I'm a Purdue grad, so don't hold that against me too much. But let's say I've got the price of a Purdue degree, and all of a sudden it's way higher. Right? What's going to happen to the demand? We can think about this like for in-state students, right? They might have had this choice between going to either state school. So if the price of a college degree at Purdue goes way up, what's going to happen to the demand for the IU degree? Well, people are less likely to want to go to Purdue now, more likely to go to IU. So we have this positive relationship. Okay. Oh, 1 second here. Sorry, there's a little dead time here. Trying to get this to work. Okay. So let's instead think about complementary goods, right? So this might be something like, oh, what's a good example of a complementary good? So let's say I've still got, let's do the price of kind of the rental price of different apartments in Bloomington, right? Well, if the price goes up, what's going to happen to a complementary good here? So in order to go to IU, if I need to live in Bloomington and all of a sudden the prices of living in Bloomington are much higher, what's going to happen to the demand for IU degrees? Well, less people are going to be willing to move to Bloomington, go to IU. So there, an increase in the complementary good actually decreases the demand for the products. So another kind of couple examples we can think about, these markets don't always have to be for like, hamburgers or cars. They can be for college degrees, right? And we have this relationship existing for substitute and complementary goods. Okay. All right. Any questions on that before I keep going? All right. So where are we at on time? I think I probably have to pick up on some of this next class because I want to make sure we have time to do this. So let's go. Oh, sorry. I need to share this. There we go. Let's go to the quiz. We'll kind of work through these. And then if we have time, we'll kind of finish out the other things that will shift demand. Okay. So going back based off what we've talked about up to this point, let's assume that I've got an inferior good. If average income in the US declines, right? We said that for inferior goods, when I have less money, right, I would actually buy more of these inferior products, right? As I have less and less money, I'm more likely to rely on public transportation, laundromats, etc. So here, if I know that demand for these inferior products when my income goes down is actually going to go up, an increase in demand, we said, is actually a rightward shift. And you kind of always remind yourself of this, even if the price stayed the same, when I have less income, I'm actually going to buy more of that inferior product. So here, A would be kind of the resulting shift in demand. And then here, what if I've got the demand curve for ramen noodles and the price of ramen noodles decreases? Well, the price of ramen noodles, right? That's not one of these other things. It's not the number of buyers. It's not income. It's not the price of other goods. It's the price of the good that's of that good itself. So if I see a change in the price of the good that I'm looking at the market of, that is just moving me to different points on the demand curve. Exactly. Movement along. So there, I'm just moving to a different point on my demand curve. So C would represent that. Okay. And then what if I have substitute goods? So I don't know, I chose SpaghettiOs, canned SpaghettiOs, and then ramen noodles. If the price of SpaghettiOs goes down, what's going to happen in the market for ramen noodles? Well, this is a change in the price of another good. It's a change in the price of a substitute good. So if I go into the store and I can either buy ramen noodles or SpaghettiOs for my meal, if SpaghettiOs are now cheaper, what am I more or less likely to want to demand ramen noodles? Less likely, right? I want to buy the thing that's cheaper. And so even at the same price, the amount that I'm going to buy of ramen noodles would actually go down, or I have this decrease leftward shift in my demand curve. Okay. Any questions there? So wait, that's B, right? So that's all the questions for today's kind of quiz. I went through it kind of quick, but I think based off what we talked about, these shouldn't have been too terribly tough. Right? Okay. Any questions before we keep moving here? Got some expectation stuff. Finish out demand here in the next 10 minutes. Okay. So this one, really, it's not it's nothing new. So income, the way that it impacts normal and inferior goods is it's the same way that expected income will impact normal and inferior goods. So if I expect to have more income tomorrow, what might I do today? So let's say I think I'm going to be making, like, in fact, my first job, I knew I was going to be making a decent amount of money. I needed a new car. So I went out, I bought a car, but I didn't have the money yet. But I expected higher income over the next year. So I was more likely to buy the car today by taking out a loan, right? So even if I have higher income expectations, I was still, maybe my current demand would still go up, right? Because I think I'm going to be able to pay these things off in the future. So normal goods, when I have more higher expected income, I'm going to see an increase or rightward shift in demand. Same kind of thing if I just actually had the increase in income. So that doesn't work any differently. Expectations of income work the exact same way as income effects that we talked about before. So when people expect there might be economic downturns and I might have less income, well, what do they do for normal goods? They're less likely to buy those. So we see like big ticket purchases for these normal goods like cars, homes, things like that. When people expect an economic downturn, so it's not that they have less money yet, they just expect that they will in the future, we see current demand go down. Okay. Now, price expectations are a little bit different. Okay. So I'll shorthand this because I think it's, I don't know, I always think seeing things shorthanded, it makes a little bit more sense. And I'm going to move these so it doesn't make it. So let's say I have price expectations. Okay. It's not a change in the current price of the good. A change in the current price of the good will just move me to a different point on the demand curve. But if I expect that prices are going to go up, so let's say I hear in the news all this stuff in the Middle East that gasoline prices are going to skyrocket over, by tomorrow morning. What's going to happen to my current demand? So if I think the price of gas is going to be higher tomorrow, what might I do today? Run to the gas station, fill my tank up, right? So if I think prices are going to be higher in the future, or I expect higher prices in the future, my current demand will actually go up. I want to make sure I'm buying it today at the lower price. And then same kind of idea. If I think prices are going to be lower tomorrow, well, what do I want to try to do? Well, I'm going to try to make sure I don't use a lot of gas today. I want to hold off and be able to buy gas tomorrow, right? So my current demand would actually decrease there. Okay. I don't think that's too crazy. Any questions on this idea? Okay. So higher future prices means I actually increase my current demand today. Kind of my catch-all category here, and this is not going to be something that I necessarily give you questions on because it's just more to cover what we see in the real world. Yes, income, related good prices, price expectations, number of buyers, all those things are going to shift our demand curve. But there's also things that we just are kind of unexpected, that things just become popular. So for example, like pet rocks were a thing at one point, right? Why was anyone paying anything over a penny for a pet rock? It doesn't make any sense, but it was a fad. Fidget spinners, you guys are, that's in your lifetime. Why were those a thing that people were willing to pay money for? Like, why did the demand for that product go up at a certain point? Who knows, right? It's all these taste and preferences that we just can't predict. Okay? So that's kind of our catch-all category for all these other things that might shift demand that aren't the ones that we've already talked about. Here, 5 minutes. So I want to talk about some things that can shift demand, and this sets us up more for stuff, honestly, even after the first exam. But I want to start introducing it now so we can have these ideas already discussed. So taxes are actually going to decrease demand, right? So this is kind of weird, but why would taxes on a consumer decrease demand? Well, the price of the good, let's say it was $5. If I'm just thinking about something as easy as like a state sales tax, well, the price of the good might still be $5, but if the sales tax goes from 10 to 20%, the actual price I pay will be 5 times 1 point, whatever that sales tax rate is. So taxes are essentially increasing the price of the good without changing the actual sticker price. So when we have an increase in taxes, essentially another way to think about this is the marginal benefit I get will be whatever I was getting before minus the amount of taxes that I now have to pay. Right? So there, if I was willing to pay $20 before, but there's a $5 tax on this good, maybe this is something like, imported goods and we're putting tariffs on other countries. Well, now there's a $5 tax. If I was willing to pay 20 before, that's the total amount I'm willing to pay. So if I have to pay a $5 tax, I'm only willing to pay $20. The price of the good is going to have to be 15. So another way of thinking about this is, here's my demand curve, quantity, price. What I'm going to see is I'm still willing, right, at this, like, let's say the third unit, this price represents my marginal benefit. So I'm only willing to pay a price up to this. But now I'll have to pay this price plus some tax. So it's almost like I'm getting the same benefit I was before minus the value of the tax, right? So my marginal benefit at each quantity is lower, or what does this look like? A decrease in demand. So taxes will decrease demand. Okay? On the flip side, if I give people money to do something, so like there's all these types of like Pell Grants and things for education, or I think there's like electric vehicles. Actually, in fact, I know there is because my wife and I have a hybrid vehicle, and one of the reasons why is because we got like a tax credit for it. A tax credit is just another word for a subsidy. So now if I'm going to get paid to do something, if I was here before, this was my marginal benefit, it's still my marginal benefit of that third unit. It's just now if the government is also going to pay me some additional amount of money, well, no matter how many units I buy, I'm getting this additional amount of money for each unit. There, we can think about this is what would go along with subsidies. I'm getting an increase, right? And then my demand curve. And then this one down here was taxes. Right? So taxes, subsidies are going to shift our demand curve. You can kind of think about it, just intuitively. If I tax a product, people are going to demand less of it. They're essentially paying more to buy the same amount. If I give them money to do something, they're going to want to buy more of it. And that's a nice, intuitive, easy way to remember it. Right? So taxes, subsidies, other examples I said, food stamps are really an example of a subsidy that once I have them, I might be willing to buy more food than I was before. So an increase in demand. So that should take us through demand, right? I've kind of got a summary of all of these things in this slide here that you can kind of reference. Next class, tomorrow, if I can get out of this view, we're going to go through supply. I'm probably going to go through this pretty quick, like all like 20, slide 20 through 36. We'll go through really quickly tomorrow and then try to save some more time to understand all the kind of later material. If for whatever reason we don't quite have enough time to cover all the material in module 3 tomorrow, I will kind of push a little bit of that onto Monday's class. We should, module 4 is a little bit shorter, so even if we have to have a little spillover into Monday, we should have plenty of time to get through module 4 next Monday and Tuesday. But I will move pretty quickly through the supply stuff so that we can spend more class time on looking at equilibriums. Okay. So any questions before I end the recording here? Okay. All right. We'll see you tomorrow.